if there's one thing we know, it's that nobody is coming to save us. It's going to be ourselves, unified and struggling together. And it's for that reason, as is tradition with Takoma Park Mobilization, just give a big round of applause to our neighbors, to each other, for showing up and being in the fight together. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to welcome you all here today. And as I do a few preliminary introductions, I'd like to invite the members of our first panel. So it would be Jonathan and let's see, Moira and let's see, and Shayna. Would you please come and join us here at the front? Thank you very much. We are waiting for the center to arrive. Unfortunately, they made a little detour at the Sligo Seventh-day Adventist Church. And a mistake that a number of us certainly have made over time. So they'll be along very shortly. So in the meantime, let me handle some of the housekeeping issues before us. The first of all, restrooms are in the back of the sanctuary, and we have greeters back there who will show you where to go if you need any attention whatsoever. As for details about the presenters and the program itself, please click on the QR code that you may have seen in the back and that is making its way around the room. You will not only see the list of the speakers, times, and so forth, but you can also, guess what, Donut? Yeah, people do need resources to survive, and that's a good way to do it, through the QR code. And indeed, it's wonderful to welcome Senator Chris Van Hollen. Chris, come on up. Hi there. Thank you. Okay. And please know that the tables in the back also will provide information and offer contacts with different organizations that will be highlighted today that are deep in the struggle with us. Take the opportunity to become more deeply involved. And finally, yes, we do need resources. As we know, we'll be confronting a surge from ICE and CBP, and that will mean more detentions, more deportations, and more demands on the community to support their families. So please be generous. We definitely will be needing your help. My name is David Reed, and I have had the pleasure of serving as the president of the Takoma Park Mobilization that is hosting this forum. I'd like to give you an overview of the program today, which is broken into two parts. The first part, we are going to look at resistance and strategies and successes at the national and state level. And this will begin with a presentation by the Honorable Chris Van Hollen. He will be followed by Jonathan Smith, who is Maryland's Assistant Attorney General and Chief of the Civil Rights Program in that office. Thereafter, we will have Shayna Chater, who is We Are CASA's Deputy Legal Director, and she'll be talking to us about the gains and some of the challenges that lie before us coming out of the legislative session that has just closed in Annapolis. And we also are waiting for Myra Loera, who will be talking to us about the work conducted from the governor's office. In this sense, we're beginning to put together this mosaic of actions, programs, and individuals that are playing a critical role in supporting our struggle for our democracy. After the four presentations, we will have a 30-minute discussion. You can pose questions, you can raise objections with the presenters that you've heard today. And just a word of caution, we will not entertain specific issues, problems that you have had as individuals. We're trying to look for the broader perspective here in the state and the county during this discussion. After the 30-minute discussion, we will begin the second segment that will begin with a presentation by Luisa Cardona, who manages the program for the Montgomery County in support of the immigrant community. After that, we'll be hearing a presentation by the Immigrant Rights Collective, or MOCO IRC as we know it, and that will be presented by Jess Cruz Serrano. Finally, we'll be inviting then Reverend Julio Hernandez to talk to us about the lessons that they have acquired during their struggles in the heights of the confrontations in Minneapolis. And we will close with two other presentations of local struggle. The first will be from Dave Williams in Hagerstown and the mighty attention and efforts that they have made. And we will close presentations then with Laura Usher from Hyattsville that also faces many challenges with the installation of a newer ICE and CBP capacity out there. So with that as a background, let me begin by asking you, who was among the very first leaders to denounce the efforts of the Trump administration to shut down, to dismantle the National Institutes of Health and dozens of federal institutions? And who was among the first to decry the forced layoffs by something called DOGE, which we hope has been relegated to history, that has affected so many families here in Takoma Park and Montgomery County and the broader state? And who was the elected leader who went to the CCOT prison in El Salvador? Not surrounded by bodyguards, not in designer clothes, and not wearing a $45,000 Rolex watch, but rather armed only with his unwavering commitment to protect his constituency and our democracy. And let me ask, who has been at the forefront of the struggles to stop the sending of U.S. military assistance that is furthering the genocide in Gaza and the West Bank? It is a great pleasure to welcome Senator Chris Van Hollen.
Are you ready to mobilize? Well, I want to thank Takoma Park Mobilization and all of you for being here. Thank you for being here to protect our democracy, to fight for our Constitution, to make sure that we defend the country we love, that we protect our community and our neighbors. Are we going to do that together? Yes. We are going to do that together, and we will only be successful if we do it together. I want to thank you, David. I want to thank you and Takoma Park Mobilization. I want to thank all the other groups that are part of this effort to protect our Constitution and our neighbors. I want to thank the Attorney General and his team, CASA, and then I also, looking out and see some of our elected officials. I see our County Executive, Mark Elrich. Thank you, Mark, for your leadership. I see the President of the Montgomery County Council, Fanny Gonzalez. I see Greg Wims, who's just soon returning from 90 days in Annapolis. Delegate Greg Wims, thank you for your leadership. And most of all, I see all of you, people who are coming together to make sure that we recognize that our Constitution is under attack and that we are facing a clear and present danger in our country. And as David indicated, we're seeing that across the board, including this illegal war in Iran, and we need to put an end to that. A war that was started by President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. It has made us less safe and is making us worse off every day. And so we will keep advancing war powers resolutions because it's important the American people hold all their members of Congress accountable. The overwhelming majority of the American people are opposed to this illegal war, and we need to make sure that we continue to hold people accountable until we're successful at ending it. Now, let me thank all of you for coming together for the purposes that we gather today, which is to fight this out of control, lawless ICE operation and the Customs and Border Patrol operations, both in Montgomery County and across our state. And I know you're gonna have a panel a little later on what happened in Minneapolis, but I have to begin by thanking and saluting the people of Minneapolis and Minnesota for standing up and for standing strong and for literally taking to the streets and blowing whistles to protect their neighbors and taking out their cameras to make sure that all of us can see the truth, even when the Trump administration wants to bury the truth. The people of Minneapolis did that, and they were undeterred even after Trump's DHS agents shot and killed 2 Americans, Renee Good and Alex Preddy. It was a shameful, shameful display of force and illegal force by this administration, but the people of Minneapolis were undeterred. They mourned those losses, but they remembered those losses by saying that we're gonna continue in that spirit, the spirit of Renee Good and Alex Preddy and all the other people who've been hurt and injured in this process. We're gonna continue in their name. And they persevered, and at the end of the day, the ICE operation, the main part of the ICE operation has left Minneapolis, but they're still there in big numbers, like they're here in Maryland in big numbers. And so we need to keep the pressure on, because the one thing we know they want, and this is why I'm so glad to see all of you here today, the reason they use the tactics that they use is to intimidate people and to make people shut up. And when you see people literally being killed when they're expressing their First Amendment rights, you can imagine that what the Trump administration wants to do is to get people to stop exercising those rights. But that's not what happened. People refuse to shut up, and people refuse to go away. So I have one question for you. Are you gonna shut up? No. Are you gonna go away? No. And that is what we need to do. We need to continue to come together. And we have been doing that in Maryland. We did come together in the early days of the Trump administration when Elon Musk did take that chainsaw to federal agencies. They've done a lot of damage, and we have a lot of repair work to do. But we came together. We also came together as a community when they literally snatched Kilmar Abrego Garcia off the streets of Maryland, off the streets of Prince George's County, just a little over a year ago today. And we mobilized. We had his mother and his wife and his brother and a whole bunch of us down on Capitol Hill to demand his release and his return to the United States, because they snatched him off the streets of Maryland and disappeared him to CASA, which is this notorious gulag in El Salvador, a gulag that's known for torturing prisoners. And the Trump administration even admitted, they admitted in court that they took him, quote, in error. That was their benign sounding way of explaining that he was snatched off the streets. But even after they admitted they took him in error, they said they're gonna let him rot in CASA. And so we did mobilize, and the Supreme Court, by 9-0, you don't see many decisions like that, made it clear that his due process rights had been violated and that the administration should facilitate its return. But they refused to do so. They just said he will stay there forever. They want to make an example out of him. They don't want people exercising their constitutional due process rights, and so we're going to continue to punish him. Well, we all got mad, and you're right. I went down. It was actually a year ago this past Thursday that I met with Abrego Garcia in San Salvador. They had tried to prevent me from seeing him at CASA. They sent the soldiers out to block him. We assembled a press conference in San Salvador and essentially called out the government of El Salvador for violating international law because he'd not been allowed to talk to his wife, his mother, his brother, or his lawyer. And so they did relent, and I got to call his wife, Jennifer, that night to tell her that he was alive because she had no idea what had happened to him. And because of persistence and pressure and his union brothers and sisters uniting and everybody uniting, lo and behold, we were successful at getting the Trump administration to do what they said they would never do, which is bring him back to Maryland. And that is where he is now. He's with his wife and family, including his 5-year-old son who has autism and who was in the car when they snatched Kilmar Abrego Garcia off the streets. But make no mistake, and this is why it's important that we never let up, because they are still engaged as we speak in a malicious, vindictive prosecution against him. And their goal is still to deport him. In fact, they now want to send him to Africa, to Liberia, which of course he has zero connection to. So the good news is he's back, and he's back before the US courts. But this administration is unrelenting in their efforts to persecute people who exercise their rights. And so that's why we need to make sure that we keep standing up and fighting for our rights. And here in Maryland, that has meant working to make sure that we do not allow the building of these mass detention centers, these concentration camps. And I want to thank Montgomery County executive and the president of the council and their colleagues. I want to thank them for passing legislation saying, here in Montgomery County, we are not going to allow detention centers. And I also want to thank the people in other counties, Howard County, Prince George's County, Baltimore County, Baltimore City. All of those counties have said no detention centers in our counties. And I want to thank Delegate Wims and the General Assembly for the actions they took to help make it clear that Maryland will not be complicit in the Trump administration's illegal ICE operations. Thank you for all your efforts there. Now, there is a county, Washington County, where ICE purchased a big property with the intention of filling the facility there with up to 1,500 people. And I know, you're having Dave from Indivisible? I just want to thank the leaders of Indivisible and everybody in Washington County, the Hagerstown area, the Williamsport area. It was months ago that on a very, very, very cold day, we had hundreds of people protesting against ICE's plans to build that facility, to build out that facility. Thank all of you who are part of that. And I want to thank the Attorney General and his office for the lawsuit they filed to make sure they put a hold on this. And I want to thank the other judges, federal judges, who have also cracked down. So, for example, in Baltimore, we have an ICE holding facility. It's not a full detention center, it's a holding facility. From the very beginning, we tried to get into that holding facility. The first time I went with Senator Alsterbrooks and Congressman Mfume and others, they wouldn't let us in. So we literally were there sitting outside the doors. Then, finally, we were able to get in the first time and talk to them about how they were lying when they claimed that they were just focused on what Donald Trump called the worst of the worst. Because if you look at their own figures, overwhelmingly, the people that they're abducting and locking up pose zero threat or risk to our community. People like People like a pastor from the Eastern Shore, people like a small businesswoman from Frederick, Vietnamese American woman who had a nail salon for 20 years. First, they put her in jail in Washington State, then they brought her back, and then when she showed up for her ICE meeting, they deported her to Vietnam. So they're not focused on the worst of the worst. We now have 60,000 people in these detention centers around the country who are being mistreated and overwhelmingly pose zero risk to our community. So we need to make sure that we all stand up and stop that outrage. I want to just close with what we're doing at the federal level here, because in my view, what we're doing to try to stop them at the federal level came about because of what all of you and people throughout the country at the grassroots level are doing, because of what people in Minneapolis are doing. It took a little while, but we did unify our caucus, our Democratic caucus, in the Senate and in the House to make it clear that we will not support one more dime for this lawless ICE operation and the lawless Custom and Border Patrol operations. And we demanded radical, meaningful changes, and I never believed that the Trump administration would agree to any serious reforms, and they didn't. For example, they wouldn't even agree to allow outside, independent, credible investigations into the shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, right? So, as you recall, the DHS folks, including Kristi Noem, I'm glad she's gone, but it's a new face, same policy. They want the people who called Alex Preddy and Renee Good domestic terrorists. They want them to be able to investigate these killings. Well, we're in a church, so I'm not gonna, well, hell no. That's an example of a change. They're not even willing to make that. So we've been very clear, and I hope my colleagues will remain firm, that we're not going to allow any more money to flow to those operations. However, what they're doing, maybe as early as this week, is they're going to do an end run around the appropriations process. They're going to use what we call the reconciliation process in Congress to provide funding for ICE and Customs and Border Patrol in a way that would allow them to do it on a strict party line vote. This is the way they provided the original money to ICE and CPB. In their so-called big, beautiful bill, which was really a big betrayal of a bill, but that's the one that's beautiful for billionaires because they provided permanent big tax cuts to billionaires, but they cut Medicaid, they cut food and nutrition programs, and in that bill, they provided ICE with 7 times its annual appropriation. And that is why ICE and CPB, which also got about double its annual appropriation, have had funds going on, and they want to replenish those funds through this backdoor method. We will fight them. It's going to be late into the night. But let me just say this, and this is why it's so important that we mobilize, because this is a fight that, you know, we need just to keep on going on. Despite our efforts, they may be successful at doing that. That process that they're going to use only works when one party controls the House and the Senate and the White House. And that is why the only way to stop them in the long run from that abusive power and those tactics is for people who, as we mobilize to protect our neighbors, also mobilize to get out and vote these people out around the country in November. And that won't solve it all. We'll still have a lawless president. He's not going to all of a sudden start obeying the law, but it will mean that they can no longer pass things at will through the United States Congress. It'll put the brakes on, it'll just full stop to things passing out of the Congress through this reconciliation measure. It will also mean, if Democrats win the majorities in the House and or the Senate, to have the gavel and to finally have a hearing and hold people accountable for these lawless activities. And so my final message is the same one I started with, which is thank you. Thank you for being there. Thank you for being there to protect our democracy and our Constitution and our neighbors against this absolutely lawless Trump administration. It's a long battle. Every day I get up, you get up, and we're at it again. The other side wants us to stop. They want us to shut up. They want us to go away. The only way we will save our democracy and our Constitution, our country, is if we stick with it, that we persist, that we never give up, just like the people of Minneapolis never gave up, just like people all over the country are getting up every day and making sure that we protect the country we love. Thank you all for being in this fight.
Senator Chris Van Hollen has never let us down. He has been at the forefront of virtually every struggle for democracy and our democratic rights. It's up to us now to make sure that he knows that whatever battle he engages in, that we will be there behind him all the way, all the time. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you. Also, you must have gotten in after I started talking, but I see a great member of the county council here who's been in these fights, Will Jawando. Thank you all very much, and onwards.
It has really been a great honor to have the Senator with us today. But we need to recognize that behind this great leadership, there are ranks of dedicated, highly professional members of the state government and our federal government who are doing day in and day out what is required to protect our democratic rights and protect the most vulnerable amongst us. And it's in that context that I'm very honored to invite Jonathan Smith, who is the director of the Civil Rights Division of our Attorney General's office, to come talk to us today about the work that they are doing and will remain there for whatever legal and legislative challenges come before us. Jonathan, it's a pleasure.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, and it's very hard to follow the senator. So forgive me if my presentation is a tiny bit more prosaic and less inspiring, but it was extraordinary to have him start the day. I'm, as said, Jonathan Smith. I'm the chief of the Civil Rights Division of the Office of the Maryland Attorney General, and I bring greetings from the Attorney General. He had been invited and was unable to make it today. He had another conflict. But he did want me to send his greetings. If the Attorney General were here today, and I hear him say this every time we meet about these issues, that he believes that nobody is above the law, and that includes the federal government and the President of the United States and ICE and other federal officials. We started planning. We started planning for the Trump administration actually the May before the election. We knew that had the election gone the way that it was, that we were going to face a tremendous challenge, gathered together with officials from states' attorney general's offices across the United States, meeting literally on a weekly basis across a broad range of domains, including work around immigration, to be prepared for this moment. And when January 20th happened, and there was the inauguration, the Attorney General set up an office in the Office of the Attorney General called the Federal Accountability Unit, and that unit, staffed by 11 lawyers and professional staff, is set up entirely, it spends its life every day holding the federal government accountable to the law, making sure that the federal government, as it relates to Marylanders, complies with the law. And we've been involved in more than 50 pieces. The Federal Accountability Unit is a separate unit from the one I supervise, but we work very closely in collaboration. And the Office of the Attorney General has now been involved in more than 50 pieces of litigation to hold the federal government accountable. It's been an extraordinary year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that Federal Accountability Unit does and the Civil Rights Division does, and how we can, and some of the lessons that we've learned, and how we really need to collaborate. And I think the other thing, before I get to there, that really is important is to recognize is that this is a collaboration across the entire sector. So we bring and have a role in the Office of the Attorney General to represent the state on its legal matters, to bring cases to protect the people of the state of Maryland and its institutions. We work very closely with the Governor's Office, the Office of Immigrant Affairs. You'll hear from Sonia Lynn in a minute about an all-government response, which has been robust and significant in bringing together all of the agencies in order to appropriately respond. And our colleagues at CASA and AMICA and other organizations that are doing incredible organizing and legal work and bringing people together. And it is only because of the collaboration that we have across all of those domains that this work is possible. I want to highlight just a couple of the cases. Like I said, we've been involved in about 50 cases. Many of them deal with a whole range of things. Around 10 of them relate in one way or another to the federal government's efforts to try to either force the state to engage in civil immigration enforcement or to directly violate the rights of Marylanders around immigration. I think that there are a few that the senator mentioned that are worth highlighting. First, as you know, there's an effort to try to build a detention facility in Hagerstown. They bought an Amazon warehouse designed to keep goods and deliver them through their Amazon services, and they have committed to turn that into a 1,500 bed or a 500 bed, or it sort of depends on what day you talk to them, detention facility in Hagerstown. And there is no detention capacity in the Mid-Atlantic region. And so the construction of that detention facility would add significantly to the ability of immigration enforcement, civil immigration enforcement across not just the state of Maryland, but the whole Mid-Atlantic region. It would have an enormous impact on the rights of our neighbors and friends and the other people in our communities. As the Attorney General would say, the federal government, when it decided to purchase that facility for $113 million and to begin to convert it into a detention facility, it did not comply with the law. Not only do we have questions about the political and moral decision to place a detention facility in Hagerstown, but they're building it without actually having respected the environmental laws which ensure that the sensitive land that it is adjacent to on the tributary to the Potomac is protected, that there's adequate ways for there to address wastewater and to bring water into that facility. And so the Attorney General's office brought litigation under our federal environmental laws, and you may have read in the newspaper, we've received initially a preliminary, a temporary restraining order and then a preliminary injunction. And we hope, and you see the Department of the Environment issued an order to the city of Hagerstown and to the county that said that they need to modify their plans in order to accommodate the facility. And so this is an important development. This is forcing the federal government to comply with the law. One of the pieces of leadership that the senator didn't talk about that he is engaged in around immigration enforcement is what is happening in the federal building in Baltimore. At the immigration court in the federal building in Baltimore, there are cells that people are confined in when they were designed for wait for a few hours while you're waiting for your case to be resolved. And in January of last year, in January of 25, when immigration enforcement in Maryland went up, when the absence of any immigration capacity, they started to hold people in those cells overnight. And they held them up to, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to really move quickly. The conditions of the cells are horrific. The people were overcrowded. People were forced to sleep in those cells without any bedding. The crowding was so severe that not everybody could lie down at any given time. There was inadequate nutrition, no access to medical services, inadequate access to hydration. The Attorney General's office has been monitoring the conditions there, and our colleagues at AMICA and at CASA have been working on this for more than a year. And then the conditions became so intolerable, the Attorney General's office has opened an investigation. We've subpoenaed the Department of DHS for records, and they've told us to go pound sand, and we are in the middle of litigation with them to enforce our subpoena. I have much more to say. I've run out of time. I just say one final thing about the Civil Rights Division. In addition to our work to hold the federal government accountable, the other thing that we know is happening across the state is that immigrants are becoming the victims of other forms of discrimination. That intolerance, that prejudice, that discrimination has become far more acceptable. It's happening in employment and in housing. We're seeing people evicted or threatened with eviction because they're immigrants. We're seeing people denied their wages because they're immigrants with the threat of ICE. That's work that the Office of Attorney General's office is engaged in, and we strongly we recognize the real challenges that people face in terms of enforcing their rights with the threat of ICE over their head. And that's work that we look forward to continuing to partner with our colleagues at CASA and elsewhere to try to enforce those people's rights. And so it's with that, thank you very much, and thank you for all being here.
We watch on a daily basis how the courts around this country have thrown impediments in the way of a proto-fascist. It's so important to know that Jonathan and his colleagues are carrying out those exact same functions, protecting us on a day-to-day basis. So thank you so much, Jonathan and their colleagues. Now, you might ask why we have invited Shana Cotter, Deputy Legal Director of We Are CASA, to talk to us about the recent legislative accomplishments and challenges that have unfolded in the first 4 months of this year in Annapolis. For indeed, many of us are very aware of the training programs, the direct support networks, the provision of legal advice, and much more that We Are CASA provides. But we should not forget that We Are CASA has been at the forefront of every legislative initiative trying to protect our democratic rights and the immigrant community around us. So the legislative session closed just a few days ago, and it's a great privilege to be able to welcome Shana, to have her summarize the lessons that we can take out of the past legislative session and the challenges that lie in front of us. Thank you, Shana.
Good afternoon. I am so pleased to be able to stand here in this particular church where many of you know that We Are CASA has very deep roots, and in this community which has been such an important source of support for CASA and our communities for such a long time. So many of you know us, but We Are CASA is an organization, we are a member-based organization that believe that working class, immigrant, Black, and brown communities have the power to create the world that they want to live in. And through our organizing, policy, and services, we work to realize this vision. I am Shayna Cotter. I'm the Deputy Legal Director at CASA. In my role, I primarily oversee our litigation against Trump's anti-immigrant policies, including having won a preliminary injunction in DC against the warrantless immigration arrests in DC that we worked with many partners on, and defending birthright citizenship at the Supreme Court. But today I am here to talk with you about some of our wins at the Maryland legislature. And we have had so many wins too on the local level, and I'm so pleased to see our county our elected officials here as well today. But I'm talking about the state today. So this has been a truly historic legislative session for immigrants, for Maryland, and for We Are CASA. We Are CASA had 3 legislative priorities this session. They were a data privacy bill to prevent the use of data, big data being sold for the use in immigration enforcement, and 2 bills that go together, one to prevent 287G agreements and one called the Community Trust Act to prevent cooperation between local law enforcement and immigration enforcement. So I am very proud to say that all 3 of those bills passed. And I will also say that it was a fight, and that the Community Trust Act and the Data Privacy Bill passed in literally the last hours of the legislative session. So last Monday was the last day of the legislative session. Our policy team, our members, our allies were there from the morning until the night, continuing to work with our elected officials to ensure that these bills passed and that we would not let up the pressure until they did. And I will tell you that there were moments during the session over the past couple of months where we have had folks tell us, you are wasting your time, the Community Trust Act will never pass. But we proved them wrong, and we, with your help, proved them wrong. So let me tell you about the Community Trust Act and the 287G bill. So together, these provide some of the most stringent limits against the cooperation between local law enforcement and immigration enforcement that exist in the country. Yeah. CASA members and allies really made the difference by continuing to show up throughout the session. And with these bills, we send a clear message that Maryland sees the extraordinary violence and terror that ICE is causing in our communities, and that we will not be a part of it. So we are so grateful to our elected officials for sending that message. The bills rest on the idea that public safety depends on community trust, and that if people are afraid to call the police or to be a witness, to cooperate with the police, then our communities are less safe. All of our communities are less safe. So the 287G ban ends formal agreements across the state between ICE and local law enforcement agencies. So those 287G agreements, as some of you are aware, it's a reference to a provision in the federal code that are formal cooperation agreements where essentially local law enforcement are acting as ICE agents. So they're co-opted into enforcing immigration law. Those agreements are now illegal in the state of Maryland. The Community Trust Act goes even farther, and it bans this informal collaboration and cooperation between local law enforcement and ICE. So what this means is that a local law enforcement officer can't pick up the phone and call ICE if they're holding someone that they believe is undocumented, only if someone has been convicted of a felony or certain sex crimes is a local law enforcement officer then permitted to communicate with ICE to notify them that they're holding somebody. So this is a victory for a couple of really important reasons. I mean, one, because we know that our Black and brown communities are targeted for enforcement, right? So any use of our law enforcement to act as arms of ICE is just disproportionately impacting our immigrant working class black and brown communities. It's important too because it's a bill that stands for a law that stands for due process. So when previously, if somebody had been charged with a crime, but not yet been convicted. So for example, imagine this scenario. A worker, a day laborer, works a job, and at the end of the day, he demands his pay. And the employer says, you know, scram or I'm gonna call the cops, I'm gonna tell them you stole something. So this is not a made-up event, right? This is something that we have seen, is unscrupulous employers and landlords threatening to call the police to use that to coerce people. So now, folks know that that threat is an empty threat, because if they are just charged with a crime, if they're accused of a crime but have not been convicted of a crime, local law enforcement is now prohibited from calling ICE. So these bills that passed, they're victories after about a decade of work. I think the Community Trust Act, or some version of it, was first introduced about 10 years ago. Our current policy director said she first worked on it in 2019, and it's just a testament to how we have to continue pushing and continuing to show up. So the folks who turned out to our emergency rally, like, a few days before the legislative session with little notice, that mattered, and it mattered when you sat there from noon to 9 p.m. the day that the 287G bill was introduced and was first debated. So I'll just speak very briefly about some of the challenges that we're seeing. So first, fatigue. But again, I just want to ensure you that continuing to show up, that it really makes a difference for our communities. If you are not on We Are CASA's mailing list, then I really encourage you to sign up. At the back, you can, on tables in the back, you'll find some materials. I've got a QR code and information on how to join our ally network. I am happy to stand up here and ask you for your financial support, because that non-earmarked money really makes a difference too. So individual gifts are critical when there are these meet-the-moment needs that arise, like we need to drive folks out to Annapolis or buy pizza for the supporters that have been sitting there all day with us. So those gifts, all these little costs and expenses, they really make a difference. But I'm really just most grateful to know that we have such a wonderful group of allies in this community in particular, and we are so appreciative, look forward to continue to work with you. Thank you.
The work of We Are CASA is phenomenal. It's often invisible, but without it, we would not be registering these incredible gains that we've just seen become law in our legislative process. So thank you ever so much for that, We Are CASA. Now, I would be remiss. Indeed, we would be remiss if we were not to provide the opportunity to our governor's office to explain what it is doing to support the immigrant community across our state. What is so important, and we're very happy to welcome Sonia Lin, the director of the Governor's Office for Immigrant Affairs, is it's true that Montgomery County may be high on the list of counties that are targeted for ICE and CBP during this surge period. But the governor's office is responsible for making sure that resources and expertise is available across the state, in every county, on every level. And it's without that understanding of we are an integrated political and economic unit. Without the governor's office leading us in these efforts, many parts of our county would be ignored. So it's with great pleasure I welcome Sonia Lin, who's the director of Governor's Office of Immigrant Affairs.
so much. Thank you, David, and thank you to Takoma Park Mobilization for hosting this fantastic event. I'm Sonia Lin. I'm the legal director in the Governor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. Some of you may not be familiar with our office. We're relatively new. We were started thanks to the leadership of the Maryland General Assembly in 2021. And up until about 6 months ago, there was just one of us. Now we're a small but mighty team with an incredibly important mission for this great state of Maryland, which is supporting the integration and the well-being of immigrant communities throughout the state. For me, this is very personal. Maryland is my home state. I left for 20 years. I came back 5 years ago, and it's just been such an honor to work in service on behalf of my home state, a state where 17% of our population is foreign-born, 22% of our workforce is foreign-born. It's about 1 million people who drive our state of 6 million people. Our foreign-born population is incredibly diverse. I think you know that very well, right? Our neighbors who are immigrants come from around the world with all different kinds of strengths and characteristics, different levels of formal education, languages, religions, and I think the thing that makes Maryland such a special place is that there is this very strong agreement across the state. It's not 100%, but it's very strong that this diversity and the fact that we are home to so many people from around the world is one of our state's greatest strengths. We hear the governor say this all the time, right? That this is what makes Maryland a great state. We know that our immigrant neighbors are parts of our communities. They're deeply integrated into our neighborhoods, our schools, our workplaces. And we also know that many of our immigrant neighbors are facing significant challenges, especially right now. And I think it's one statistic that really jumps out at me and I think is worth pondering. 6% of children in Maryland have at least one undocumented parent. And so these are families that are struggling with tremendous fear and uncertainty right now, and it's affecting our children. I think just taking a step back, we've heard a lot about the incredible work in the community, in government, with our Attorney General's office, with our federal, state, and local leaders to meet the moment and the demands of this moment. But let's just take a step back to see what is happening now, especially in our state. I think we've seen the news throughout the last year and the really jarring images that have come out of Minnesota, out of Chicago, Los Angeles, of just immigration enforcement that is designed to terrify and just create so much fear and chaos. That has been happening in Maryland as well. Maybe not at the same levels of flashiness that we've seen in other parts of the country, but we are seeing heightened immigration enforcement affecting neighborhoods and communities throughout the state. And so, with the statistics that we've seen that have been obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests from ICE, we've seen arrest rates at quadruple the levels that they were in 2024 and continuing to climb. So ICE is in communities, is arresting our neighbors every week, every day throughout the state. And we have not seen that, diminish over the course of the last year plus. As folks have mentioned, the community members who are being affected, it's sort of everybody. So, as the senator was saying, it's not the so-called worst of the worst. I don't even know what that means, right? It's people who don't have criminal histories, haven't really been involved with the criminal system. It's people who find themselves arrested in the community, so sort of non-custodial arrests have increased. That means in the workplace, in neighborhoods, when going to routine immigration appointments. And in addition to increased enforcement, we're seeing federal policy changes that effectively kind of delegalize people who've had some kind of protection, some access to work authorization, or have indeed already been vetted and approved for some kind of humanitarian protection, like refugee status or asylee status. And so we see this ongoing threat to temporary protected status, which protects tens of thousands of Marylanders. We're seeing attacks on refugees and asylees who've gone through vetting and approvals to be granted protections here in the United States. And we're seeing sort of delays and uncertainty for people in the immigration system just because of what country they come from. And so, you know, this is really affecting immigrants nationally, and it's affecting people here. As far as what the governor's office is doing, I think this will really be a theme for today. It is all about partnerships, and it's all about working with our partners in community, in government, in the private sector to sort of put our resources together and collaborate in supporting our immigrant families. One thing that we have been very excited about now that we've passed a budget for the state and we've gone through the legislative session is new investments in immigration legal services. And we're excited to reach more communities throughout the state in partnership with the incredible immigration legal service providers who do this work on the ground every day. We are very excited also just to highlight a few kind of programs and efforts to work with our colleagues at the University of Maryland, Carey School of Law, and the Chacon Center for Immigrant Justice on efforts to train community members, members of the legal community, on the Federal Tort Claims Act, which is a federal statute that allows for claims for sort of wrongdoing, rights violations to be pursued by individuals who have found their rights to be violated or tort to be caused against them by a federal agent, so that we are prepared. And that, you know, as we continue to see like rights abuses in our state, and if we see them increase, that community members can be looking out for each other and filing these claims, and the legal community is prepared. The last thing I want to mention is that, you know, there's a lot of work to do to support each other, protect each other, and defend each other, but I think we don't want to lose sight of celebration and sort of positivity as well, and recognizing all that immigrants bring to the state. And to that end, we have been really excited and thrilled to partner with colleagues to support immigrants in applying for citizenship. It's a really profound, life-changing journey, taking that step to naturalize and become a US citizen. And actually, I don't think that Council President Fanny Gonzalez is here at the moment, but we had the incredible privilege to work with her in her office. I think it was just last week. Feels like a long time ago to hold a citizenship clinic in Wheaton that drew a crowd of about 150 people who were interested in taking that next step to becoming a US citizen. You know, it was a lot of people, more than we expected, but as the council president kept saying, it's a good problem to have, and one that we are very excited about. And we're excited to sort of welcome our neighbors as volunteers in supporting you know, neighbors in becoming citizens, and welcoming our immigrant community and supporting them in that path towards citizenship. So I'll stop there. Please look out for us you know, in the months ahead. We are rebuilding our website. Right now it's extremely spare, but you can find more about our activities there. And hopefully in the coming months, we'll have a snazzier site and more news to share. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Sonia. We are now going to begin a segment of the ending of this first segment of our program by opening the discussion up to all of you. So if you have any questions, any concerns, want to take contrary positions relative to what you've heard from the presenters today, please do so. To begin, identify yourself. If you'd like, identify if you are part of an organization, an affiliation. And other than that, we'll be passing the microphone to Karen Elrich, who is the treasurer of Takoma Park Mobilization. Will be managing from the floor here. So there are two, just one. Oh, if you have questions, please come down to this aisle over here. It's okay, you can walk in front. No problem. And please, and we'll just stay, all the members of the panel will just stay here where we are, and we'll take the questions seated from here at the table. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Karen.
Okay, I'm taking a minute as the treasurer. I'm sorry. It takes money to do this, and it takes money for helping the families, and it takes money for having people on the ground working on ice. So if you go to the QR code, that takes you to our website, and you can donate that way. There's a jar in the back, and that's for Takoma Park Mobilization, so that these kinds of events can happen. And we really have spent a lot of money on these things, so please, please donate. And also go in the back there, we have IRC and the Community Support Network. They are supporting families who have had their earners leave. So please pull into your pockets and let people know that you care through the money that you give. That's my speech for the treasurer. Now, anybody else want to talk? Come on up. Please keep it short if there's a lot of us, and questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm curious what the status is of unmasking ICE in Maryland, and if there is legislation requiring ICE to be unmasked, and what the enforcement would be.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Lynn Rust. I live in Silver Spring.
Thanks so much for asking. So I am very pleased to say that at this legislative session, our state legislature passed a bill to prohibit local law enforcement from masking during routine operations. I had the pleasure of testifying in support of that bill at both at the Senate and at the House. But it was, we're pleased to announce that as another legislative victory. But I think other folks at this table may have more to say about that as well. No? Maybe not.
No,
I think
Okay.
it's actually all law enforcement in the state.
It's all like
Oh,
yes.
well, I'm
Next,
corrected.
step up.
All law enforcement in the state. Thanks.
Give us your name, please.
Hi, I'm Jessica Landman from Takoma Park. I'm a city council member, that's why they're doing that. My question has to do with the opposition to the 287G bill that was passed. Some Maryland sheriffs had said that they intend to defy that law, and I guess this question is for the Civil Rights Office. What does Maryland plan to do about internal opposition in the state of Maryland to implementation of the new law?
So it's the it's a short answer. It's the responsibility of the Attorney General to defend the laws of the state of Maryland. Sheriffs have threatened to bring litigation challenging the bill. They had a press conference a few weeks back. We'll see if they actually do. It's sort of, nothing certainly has been filed. I think there's some fairly serious questions about whether they even have standing to bring the case. But the Office of the Attorney General will defend the statute and has the responsibility to enforce it.
Hello, my name is Alyssa Mendez-Rank, and I teach music at Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm also a member of the Montgomery County Educators Association. And my question is pretty simple. I work at a school that is 85% Hispanic. I've already been hearing things about what's going on in the community, but I want to know, as an educator, how to be better prepared for this possible surge.
Is this on? Oh, it's on. Thanks for that question. I think that Sheena may have more thoughts about this, but I can start just by saying that, last year, the Maryland General Assembly passed a law on sensitive locations in the state, including schools, as well as libraries, health facilities, places where it's really crucial that members of our community can continue to access those places and be able to access the services and programs that are delivered in those places. And you may have heard about this. Basically, it requires schools, libraries, public health facilities to really clearly delineate what are public spaces and what are non-public spaces in those facilities. And for non-public spaces, make clear that if there are immigration officials who want to enter into those spaces, they need a judicial warrant. They can't just come in, and staff need to be trained on how to handle that and what are the policies and protocols in place. This year, the Maryland General Assembly actually passed sort of a successor bill, sort of expanding sensitive locations in the state, including to bus stops, and there was one other school-related facility, as well as food distribution sites, right? Again, with this idea that we want places where essential public services are being delivered to be safe and accessible. It doesn't mean, right, that these are going to be absolutely like no zones for immigration enforcement authorities, but staff are trained and are required to require a judicial warrant and without interfering with immigration, without preventing some kind of obstruction or interference. That being said, and I think maybe Jonathan, because I know the Attorney General's office has issued really important guidance along those lines for our schools and for our sensitive locations across the state. That being said, I know there's also incredible work that's happening in the community to support sort of teachers and community members and working with immigrant families to just make sure they're aware of resources and programs to support those families. That also includes working with families who are really worried about detention and deportation and the possible sort of separation of families. And so that is one thing that our office has been doing, is working with organizations to train community members on sort of family preparedness, standby guardianships, and kind of making plans for families that are very scared right now. And so those kind of programs are also available, and I think offer something in this moment.
If I might just very quickly add just a couple of things. First of all, it's been the law for 30 years that immigrant children have a right to be educated, and that remains to be the law. And even though there's some efforts to begin to try to challenge that, a case called Plyler versus Doe, so immigrant children have a right to be in our schools and to be educated. The other thing I would say is that there is, the guidance is up on our webpage, the Attorney General's webpage. It's fairly, you go on the webpage, you'll see something called federal response. It'll take you right to a whole series of guidance, law enforcement guidance. The guidance, there's a bunch of, there's some really good guidance from the superintendent of schools on bullying, but also the guidance on sensitive locations. The one thing I would say is that it would be difficult in a forum like this in the time we have to try to really fulsomely answer your question. In your school, there should be a coordinator. There should be somebody already who's responsible for dealing with ICE. It's that you should know that phone number to call if ICE shows up in your classroom, what to do, and have somebody trained from the school that's able to respond. And no matter what we say about what ICE can and can't do, ICE is going to do what it's going to do, and you just have to be aware of what your rights and responsibilities are in that context, and how to keep yourself from placing yourself in harm's way. And that's something that we'd spend the afternoon talking about, not to answer in terms of a short question. So going back to your school and really asking the question, who's our coordinator on this? And who's responsible for sensitive locations? What kind of training can we provide to school personnel about what to do if ICE comes? How do I deal with ICE officer who says, I don't have a judicial warrant, but I don't care. I'm going to go grab that parent or that student anyway. How do you respond to that? That's something your school's going to have to really work with you to resolve, because you place yourself in some jeopardy if you get in the way.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good answer.
Yeah.
No worries. I got a question right here. Good afternoon. First of all, thanks to TP Mob for doing this and putting it together, and thank you for taking your valuable time and addressing this core issue of our democracy. Is the presence of local law enforcement a deterrent in any way to ICE action like abductions?
Introduce yourself.
And, pardon me, I'm Paul Huber. I'm a tax-paying resident of Takoma Park and a 40-year union member. So is that a deterrent for the local police to be there, for instance, to film it? And what are the legal limits for local law enforcement on taking pictures or filming the activity in terms of the veracity and the proof of the action that's being taken? The first guy abducted in Takoma Park was on my corner, and I encourage you to try to address this question. Thank you.
I'll start, at least in that regard. So under Maryland law, state law enforcement, and this has been the law since Trump won, state law enforcement agencies, and now it's been strengthened under the most recent set of the Trust Act, state law enforcement officers are not allowed to participate in civil immigration enforcement, period. The one place where you're going to see state law enforcement and local law enforcement get involved is they may provide public safety if there's some sort of, incident around the arrest or the detention or the kidnapping of the individual by ICE. So they may get between people who are demonstrating. And there's nothing in the state law that prohibits them creating public safety, but they cannot facilitate or assist the federal agents in the immigration enforcement. There's nothing that prevents our local law enforcement from recording and making records of what happened, and it's going to be recorded because under our state law, all state and local law enforcement must wear body-worn camera video, and that is to be captured. And so you're going to have that record. In addition, in legislation in this last legislative session, there's a requirement that, that under certain circumstances, there be an effort made to try to determine if the misconduct had occurred, who engaged in that misconduct by the federal law enforcement agencies. So the law has been significantly strengthened. How successful that will be is going to be an interesting set of questions because it's very difficult to compel the federal law enforcement officers to disclose their identity or any information about who they work for. And we're seeing this, with the very indictment that happened just last week in Minneapolis. So there's some real federal state challenges there, but our laws are very strong. We're mandating that state and locals stay out of anything other than creating public safety.
I'll just add to that, and I realize this wasn't exactly your question, and I may be preaching to the proverbial choir, but I mean, of course, there's nothing that prohibits any of you or any citizens from recording ICE enforcement activity. And I know there's various ICE watch groups, including here in Montgomery County, where you can get trained on some protocols for doing that. And I will also note that CASA has a hotline where you can report ICE activity if you've seen it, and we will be able to provide support to affected community members as well as use that information in broader advocacy, kind of in an anonymous form, of course.
Okay. We'll take two more questions, and then we'll shut down the segment. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Elizabeth Wallace, Takoma Park resident. I understand this is mostly about ICE, and it is an extreme problem here in the United States, and that recent laws have been passed to help make sure local law enforcement doesn't work with ICE. But we live in a sanctuary city, but there's a disconnect in my mind when I look at what our local police department has asked for in the recent budget, which is preparation for high-risk active threats, budgeting for ballistic shields and rifle-rated protection during active threats and warrants, advanced combat and night tech for red dot sights, night vision and IR technology, immersive combat training for firearms simulators and Unit 4 training rifles, which are like assault rifles. Continuous surveillance over the next 3 years for cameras providing real-time intelligence in high-risk areas. So, I got it. It's hard to be up here. Now, so will you be, or are you already paying attention to other police departments in the area and watching what their budgets are and what equipment they are purchasing for perhaps future use? Thank you.
I don't know that anybody at this podium has that authority. I can tell you that the Attorney General's office does not have any supervisory responsibility or authority over local law enforcement except if there's been the death as a result of law enforcement activity. General Assembly, in its infinite wisdom, declined to give the Attorney General that authority about 3 years ago. And so we are not engaged in any, other than the authorities that are given under the most recent immigration statutes, in any law enforcement related sort of accountability projects. The short answer is no, yes.
Thanks, Karen. Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Coppell. I'm a lead with Montgomery County Immigrant Rights Collective and Blair Unida. I'm going to try to land this quickly as a question, but I want to start with a very brief comment, which is to say thank you for the things you flagged that are what our immigrant neighbors need most, and the challenges that they're facing with rental challenges, employment discrimination. Thank you, CASA, for the ways you've been an incredible partner to the Immigrant Rights Collective. That collaboration has been key. I think the comment I want to make, and I welcome your reflections on this, is how would you encourage this audience to ground ourselves in what our immigrant neighbors are asking for? Because I'm a little concerned that it is too easy for us to focus on the problem as it is evidenced by the work of ICE, CBP, and other enforcement agencies, and miss the efforts that are grassroots that are directly meeting the needs of our immigrant neighbors, that have raised more than $1 million to fill those gaps as our neighbors are struggling. So as our community members, as our neighbors, and in the roles that you fill, what do you hope folks will leave here understanding they can do today?
I so appreciate the question, which is such an important one. And I know this is perhaps somewhat self-serving to say, but I really do believe at CASA that we are driven, our priorities are driven by our membership. And I hope that you know that if you are supporting CASA, you are supporting work that's driven by the communities and by the affected communities. So when we are asking allies to join us, that's work that is driven, by our members and affected communities to realize the vision of self-determination for affected communities. And I am also really pleased to sit up here with partners in this work who have really demonstrated that they are listening to the needs of the community, and who we really do consider partners at both the Governor's Office and the Attorney General's Office. So yeah, I think that's my response, but I think it's just so important for folks to continue to ask themselves that question when they see a problem and before they are, trying to formulate their solution on their own.
One more thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'd just like to sort of add and echo on what Shayna is saying. We really appreciate the work of BOCO IRC, of CASA, and Takoma Park Mobilization, the community groups that are really working together with, our immigrant communities. And, I'll just say sort of from my seat representing the Governor's Office, but also over a decade of working in government at federal, state, and local level, you just got to keep pushing us, right? Please, it is that energy, it is the questions and the demands and the advocacy that sort of make the work happen. And so we are, it doesn't mean that we will always agree, right? But it's important to be in that dialogue, and we are very grateful for it.
Yeah, just one more thing as the treasurer. The people on the ground are in the back there on the tables. You know, find out what you can do. It's not just about money, folks. It's about knowing your community and knowing who's working in your community. Go back there, talk to them, see what it is that you can do. You know, can you cook? Can you drive? Can you do, I mean, they have everything that is needed. So please remember, they're in the back. Thank you.
So we will now bring this first segment of our program to a close. Let me ask, is Natalie Fanny Gutierrez still here? No, she didn't depart. Okay, I'd offered her a moment to speak to us. Evidently, she had other obligations. So with that, I would like to thank again our panelists. And I would like our second set of panelists to come forward at this point. And we will have a 5-minute break now. And remember, a number of the questions that were asked focus on what can they do at a local level. And that's exactly where we want to go in the second part of this public forum. What is happening at the local level? Who can help out and in what way? So thank you very much. Please come on up, other members. 5-minute break. Righty, folks, we're going to go ahead and start the second part of our program. Be so kind as to grab a seat. So indeed, if during the first segment we focused on national and statewide issues, during this second part, we are going to give much more attention. We want to bring it back home. We want to bring it to the county, and we want to bring it to our local organizers, to our local organizations. So I am very pleased to introduce our first presenter this morning. And a month ago, I had the privilege spent an evening with Luisa Cardona, our next presenter, and who engaged an audience of some 50 groups and organizations in explaining the myriad of programs that Montgomery County offers to the most vulnerable folks among us. And what became readily apparent to me in listening to members that evening is that we know that with the surge, with the intensification of the detentions and the arrests and deportations, that we will need to rely ever more heavily on the resources and the technical expertise that members from the county can offer us. So it's with great pleasure that I'm happy to welcome Luisa Cardona, who directs the program at the county level addressing these issues of immigrant rights and needs. Thank you very much. Luisa?
Sorry about that. Hi, Luisa Cardona. As noted, I am an Assistant Chief Administrative Officer with the Office of the County Executive for Montgomery County. While a long title that includes a myriad in the portfolio, really the most exciting part for me and what really is the closest to my heart is that I get to be tasked with implementing a lot of the amazing legislation that has passed at our county level. I know a lot of our council members were here and you guys have heard in the news of all the legislation that is being passed. I am tasked with the implementation of a lot of that, as well as oversight of the departments that provide the direct services for our immigrant communities. I do want to start a little bit with the implementation of our legislation. So while the Trust Act recently passed, County Executive Mark Elridge had implemented an executive order since the prior Trump administration in 2019, which really, this is a codification of that. And it's very important to know what that means. It really means that Montgomery County does not consent to civil immigration enforcement on our premises, right? This includes our buildings, yes. Our buildings, our parking lots, and so part of that implementation for me has been training. We have over 8,000 employees. They needed to be trained on our county policies and our procedures. You will also start seeing additional signage going up in all of our county buildings that denotes, from the Values Act, if something, the sign will say, the county does not consent to civil immigration enforcement, and it will also denote when something is a private versus public space. And if it is a private space, for example, in some of our Montgomery Cares clinics where patients are going in to receive services, a private space, that private space, a county employee cannot consent to civil immigration enforcement, meaning they cannot open the door for ICE enforcement to go into the premises. So you will start seeing those signs go up in the next few months. If you don't, you know who to call. Call Mark Elrich. No, call me, please. He'll just tell you to call me. So we are rolling those programs out and the training of our employees, which is very important. The oversight of the programs and services, right? This is really at the heart of what we are doing directly for the community. Montgomery County has a long-standing reputation for investing directly into nonprofits that provide these direct services. So this hasn't necessarily changed, but what we did was we pivoted dramatically under this Trump administration because we took the threats as very serious. When someone says they are going to start rounding up and deporting, we took that serious and we knew that we needed to pivot where our funding was going at that time. With that, the creation of the Lighthouse program, which is an HHS. This program provides direct support to families who have been traumatized and destabilized by deportations. What does this mean? It means housing, food insecurity, workforce development services, as well as mental health services and legal consultations. This is really the crux of our program, and it is a program that, while it's under HHS, it is a grant-funded program that is run directly by our local nonprofits, which includes Identity, as well as CASA and Rainbow, right? We know that we as county cannot do everything. We also know that it is important for you not to give the government all of your information, particularly if you are someone who is undocumented, which is why we work directly with our nonprofits to provide these services. I will say that this funding is significant. I would measure to say, and you can have Sonia from the governor's office verify this, I think it is one of the largest investments in the state in direct services. Is it enough? Absolutely not, right? It is not. Because we are seeing quite a dramatic increase right now, right? It's not that we are waiting for a surge. We have already started to see this escalation. And yes, while what happened in Minnesota meant that they were now doing it quieter, it is still happening. So through the numbers of our direct service providers, we know that the deportations and detentions in Montgomery County alone have almost tripled, if not quadrupled. We also know through our providers that the direct services that they are providing are getting more and more complex. We have a tiered system for providing the direct services. And at the top of that tier are families who are the most destabilized, right? Who have lost a head of household, who are at risk of losing their home, who are at risk of other factors. We are seeing more and more of those cases every single day. A prime example of one of those cases that we're seeing more and more is when an 18 or 19-year-old is now in charge of multiple siblings because they have lost one parent or both parents due to that deportation, right? And so that instability of having a high schooler pretty much take care of an entire family and guiding them through that process is something that is very important and why we have invested so much funding into that stabilization. We also have our Gilchrist Immigrant Resource Center. Through the Gilchrist Immigrant Resource Center, which is a long-standing program, it's our more visible program. It has Know Your Rights services. It guides people to different legal resources. And it is also where families, if you know anyone who needs to be connected to our Lighthouse support program, they can call the Gilchrist Center. And really to conclude a lot of what I've been saying is to say thank you to all of you in this room. Thank you to the rest of this panel, right? Because it is really the nonprofits, it is really the organizers, the collective action that is happening, because you guys really allow government to do what it does, but also you do what we cannot do. I am someone who, as an immigrant myself and an undocumented immigrant at a time who came up through CASA, I know that when there are barriers in government and barriers in legal resources, it is advocacy, it is the direct on-the-ground organizers that really achieve the impossible. Thank you.
I think it's very difficult to underestimate the impact that this shift in Montgomery County to providing resources to private institutions and action groups, it is fundamental. It has greatly increased the effectiveness of the support from the county to directly supporting those with the most important and direct needs. So, with the, at this point, let me just get this thing to tighten up a little bit. The Congregation Action Network reflects the fundamental role that faith-based organizations play in this broader movement of protecting our democracy and resisting the illegal activities of the federal government. Today, we are privileged to have Reverend Julio Hernandez, who, along with other congregants, spent days this cold winter with communities, faith communities in Minneapolis during the absolute heights of that really ice surge and brutal crackdown. So we really look forward to learning the lessons that Julio and his colleagues have pulled out of the struggles in Minneapolis to understand better their application, their pertinence to us here in Takoma Park and Montgomery County. Julio, thank you.
Minneapolis was the vision of the future of MAGA. We cannot fool ourselves. We need to ask the question of who do we want to become as a country? Because this movement that imposed a paramilitary force upon the people of Minneapolis would like to cleanse this country and make it less pigmented than it already is. In the mid-2040s, we're looking at a time where we'll have a majority pigmented people. And that causes fear among those who are racist, who have their own vision of the future. On the plane to Minneapolis, we met on our return home, we met a reporter who specializes in reporting on infringements upon law enforcement, upon the human rights of people. And she said, just one act of what I witnessed would stop a police force for a year. I witnessed something every 8 minutes that should shut down what's happening. I heard the story of a pastor who said that one of his parishioners, a white man, witnessed a small immigrant woman being arrested. And she stood up to the ICE officers and said, I am not afraid. In that moment, the parishioner had a feeling of solidarity and stood next to her and said to the officers the same thing. I am not afraid. An officer from ICE pulled out his gun and pointed it at his temple, a white man, and asked, are you afraid now? We heard of a group of young white men playing a sport out in Minneapolis who were stopped and asked for their papers. And they said, we're white, why are you asking us? Really, it was not about your color or who you were. They wanted you to comply. They wanted to break your will and make you obey at no matter what the cost. When I returned and was telling this story of what we witnessed in Minneapolis, in the faith group leader, there was one minister who said, I served 30 years in the police force. Because in that presentation, I said, this was bad training. And he said to me, I've served 30 years in police force. This is not bad training. This is the training. In Minneapolis, we were at another meeting, and we were hearing stories about what was happening. And one minister who served in one of the military forces said, in the military, we have to count for every bullet that we have. And what we witnessed in Minneapolis is cases of bullets strewn about the street. There is no care for people's human rights. What they want you to do is just to simply obey. What I learned in Minneapolis is that we must have the courage to dream. I got to meet the leader of the Islamic coalition in Minneapolis, and in the first Trump administration, they dropped a bomb in his mosque. He said, the only reason I survived is our mosque was in an old school, and we had brick walls, and that stopped the impact of the bomb. And he went to a meeting with Isaiah, and he said, I brought my pen and paper ready to learn. And when he told the story about that incident where the bomb was laid in his mosque, then the organizer asked him, what are you going to do about it? He said, I threw my paper up in the air and I said, oh my goodness, I wasn't ready for this question. Well, this imam then started to dream. And with those relationships he built with his community, they built a center. It's a conference center. You can rent it out for use for conferences. At the front of the conference center, they have two establishments. One is a restaurant and one is a coffee shop. He said to us, this is like one of the kavas, but it's our Muslim version. And you can get a really good salad that is halal. Behind the conference center, there was a small business incubator where you could rent offices. At the front of the building, they had these little tiny mailboxes where you could rent to start your own address as you're beginning your own business. And one of the most beautiful things that we witnessed is they had a whole hallway of 5 financial institutions that offered interest-free loans. Because if you're Muslim, you cannot take a loan out with interest. And at the front of that building as well, there was an ATM, and he said to me, you see that ATM? That's for one of the most racist cities here in Minneapolis, but their bank believes in us and put an ATM in our building. Another thing they did is they negotiated with the airport and the driving services to allow their site to be a place of rest for drivers. So they had the little lounge for the drivers, and then they had a prayer room so that drivers could pray in the middle of the day when they had their appointed time of prayer. So the courage to dream is really important in this time and what we learned in Minneapolis. The third thing is we must broaden our base. What we witnessed in Minneapolis is a coalition of labor, community, and faith coming together. Just like we need a biodiversity for our environment to thrive, we need the same thing in ethnic and cultural diversity in our organizing. And we must have a vision that can welcome those who consider us enemies. Our love has to be greater than what the hate is that what we are experiencing right now. The fourth thing, we must organize. And I believe that we need to think in 2 ways. One is defensive and one is offensive. Defensive, thinking about mutual aid. How do we safeguard our community against the attacks that are happening, developing legal observers and hospitality? In the offensive, right now, the power only understands money. So we need to use the power of the purse to resist what's happening. We saw that in the general strike. We must create a culture that is willing to live in poverty, not in the visceral greed that we're witnessing right now. We also must organize resistance through disrupting the system. They played music outside of hotels. They targeted car rental groups that rented cars to ICE. And then lastly, I believe that we need to work towards accountability, but accountability is based on restorative justice. Just like the Gacaca courts in Rwanda, we need to develop a system that both retains accountability, tells the truth, but looks to create better systems for our people, not punitive systems. We witnessed also a very strategic, targeted civil disobedience. There were 90 faith leaders that were arrested when they shut down the airport in Minneapolis. Shortly after that, we organized here 50 faith leaders to be arrested in the Hart Building. Of those 50 faith leaders, 30 were first-time participants in civil disobedience. So today, I end in asking the question, what kind of people do you want to become, Maryland?
I am so glad that the Congregation Action Network lives amongst us and with us and inspires us. Thank you very much, Julio. This is the 3rd public forum that the Takoma Park Mobilization has organized to deal with these threats to our democracy. During our first public forum back in September, the Immigrant Rights Collective presentation really was a presentation of struggling with chaos, disorder, all the while that the IRC, MoCo IRC as we know it, was providing training, setting up food, health, clothing networks. It tracked and monitoring ICE agents, and just to mention a few. During the intervening 6 months since that first presentation of IRC, this organization has acquired an amazing sophistication in communication and management of resistance efforts. And in a sense, it has become now a statewide organization as it's preparing really to protect all of us, against the surge, as Luisa says, that is actually taking place right now. So I'm very pleased to welcome Jess Cruz-Serrano to share the lessons of IRC that it has gained, that it has matured and provided this leadership to us over the past 6 months.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this event and for being here today. My name is Jess Cruz Serrano, and I am a lead organizer with Montgomery County Immigrant Rights Collective and a co-founder of our community ICE Watch, our community care, our community engagement, and our community education subcommittees. And I'll tell you a little bit about the work that we do here. So we are a mutual aid collective of volunteers, grassroots efforts, and we organize for our community, with our community. So the difference in us being, or the impact of us being a mutual aid collective, is that we can be very adaptable to the needs of our community very quickly. Just as Luisa Cardona mentioned earlier, we are able to meet needs of our community that a lot of the time government and nonprofits are not able to meet, because we are able to be nimble and quick in the moment. So I'll tell you a little bit about each of those subcommittees and how we respond, but I want to make sure that I mention that our mutual aid collective is an impacted, founded, and impacted-led, community-centered organization of volunteers. What does that mean? So it means that our collective of volunteers, the work that we do, is led by those that are most impacted by this violence that we are seeing. The decisions we make are led by those that are seeing and on the receiving end of this violence. We are centering those most impacted in this work, in how we move through this space, in the decisions that we make. So I want to make sure that that is at the forefront when I tell you about specifically the work that we do. So we do community ICE Watch, or community rapid response. And what that means is we have volunteers that dedicate their free time to patrol areas in which we have seen ICE violence, we have seen detentions, and they report back to our network of volunteers so that we can alert community members so they know to stay away from targeted areas. The way that this work is community-centered is that we are in constant communication with folks that are impacted by this violence in the way that we move through this ICE Watch work. So for example, we don't use whistles here in this region. We allow community to guide the decisions in the way that we choose to do this work, in the way we do this. And we have consulted with community members, and they have told us explicitly that they do not want whistles to be used in our ICE Watch work. So that is what we do, and that is how we choose to move. And the way that we do community care work or mutual aid work, which was mentioned a little bit earlier, we are in community with over 200 families across Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and several other counties in Maryland, and I'll tell you more a little about that in a bit, that provide families with support, but in a way that is not abiding by a charity model. We are, again, a collective of volunteers. And because we're hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, you can imagine the folks we have in our spaces. Some of you are in our space. We have folks that are lawyers. We have folks that are social workers, teachers. We have folks that can sew, that can drive. So we are basically volunteers that are pooling our collective resources and redistributing those resources and services and our skills and our experiences to where they're needed. And so when we have a family tell us they need something, they need a ride to a medical appointment because they're scared to go on their own, or they need assistance in navigating a school procedure, we have volunteers that we tap into and they step up to meet those moments. That is mutual aid. That is how we center community. I want to talk now a little bit about our community education that we do. So as of the beginning of just this year, we have trained almost 4,000 people in our community ICE Watch work, in our community education. We also have a training to train folks on how to be a bystander, what to do if you witness ICE violence in your community, how to record, how to exercise your rights in recording. Because as was mentioned earlier, we have the right to record law enforcement activity in our communities. That is our First Amendment right. So we have trainings to empower people with that information, on how to use that information to be in solidarity with impacted community members. And we have had the pleasure and honor of partnering with organizers in other counties across the state and outside of the state. So we actually have been able to work with organizers on the ground to establish a Prince George's County Immigrant Rights Collective, a Wicomico County Immigrant Rights Collective, a Central Maryland Immigrant Rights Collective that encompasses 6 counties in Maryland. We also have a Southern Maryland Immigrant Rights Collective now that has Calvert County, Charles County, and St. Mary's County, and York County, Pennsylvania Immigrant Rights Collective. And we also have, they don't have the IRC name, but they are implementing the IRC model of care on mutual aid. But we have a network of organizers doing this work in West Virginia also. So the impact of our work has extended beyond Montgomery County because our community and those a part of our collective see the impact of being in solidarity with those most impacted by what we are seeing. So I want to invite you to get involved. There are many ways that you can join this work, and we have tables in the back where you can talk to folks on how you can connect and how you can donate, but I want to encourage you to learn, to educate, to break down things, to unlearn things that maybe we've internalized for a long time, to lean into discomfort. If our mobilization, if our efforts do not center the most impacted, and it is not led by the most impacted, it is saviorism. It is self-centering. It contributes to harm. So let's show up in new ways, ways that may stir up discomfort in us, but that lead to growth, to solidarity, and community. Thank you.
I think you can see why, with Jess's and IRC's vision and determination, they have emerged as a statewide force in this struggle. Thank you very much. I met Dave Williams a bunch of months ago on a blistery, cold, wet, disgusting morning when Invisible Washington County had organized a protest in front of the County Board of Commissioners. And there was a very small turnout that one particular day. I wonder why I even showed up. It was so miserable. But it's been month in, month out, day in, day out, that the community groups in Hagerstown have elevated their struggle to stop the installation of that 1,500-bed detention center to become a national issue. It has been used, I hope you've seen, some of you, on Rachel Maddow, it has been highlighted as an example of how you stop the creation of those detention centers. So it's really a great pleasure to introduce you to Dave Williams, who will talk about the struggles that they have had in this divided rural city called Hagerstown and environments. Welcome, Dave. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for having me here today. I'm representing Washington County Indivisible, but just to be clear, Indivisible is not the only organization in Washington County working to fight the warehouse and working to provide mutual aid to immigrants. We work with We've been around for about a year since the Trump administration took office. There's another group that started when the warehouse started. They've been around about 3 months. That's Hagerstown Rapid Response. They've been very instrumental in the changes that have been happening. We work with Hagerstown Area Religious Council, NAACP. Western Maryland IRC is starting to form. So it's a big coalition of groups that are doing the work. It's not just indivisible. Thanks for having me here today. I'd like to thank all of you for the work that you continue to do in this struggle. Without all of us working together, I don't know if we'd have had the good news that we had this past week that came out of Judge Herson's courtroom in Baltimore. That was a big pick-me-up for all the people in the county, that temporary restraining order is now a restraining order. It gives us a little bit of a breather before the fight continues. In Washington County, our indivisible group was less than a year old when the warehouse story broke. Up until then, we'd been doing the usual protests and actions about the many abuses of the Trump administration. Then, overnight, one of those abuses landed in our own backyard. We've learned many lessons since the Christmas Eve article in the Washington Post revealed the plan to convert industrial warehouses into prison camps for people, so-called ICE detention and processing centers, and that Hagerstown, the Washington County seat, was on the list to have one of those centers. Now, we learned practical organizational things like the importance of communication, establishing ways to communicate with our members and with other concerned citizens. As a community with a dying local paper and with no local TV, we learned to connect with other news organizations. We learned about the importance of the Public Information Act and how to get those requests filled. We learned to work with other groups within our county, other groups around the state have come to our aid. So we've been working with those groups, and there have been groups across the whole country that have contacted us and that we work with. So it's been a real learning experience of working with all these various coalitions. And sadly, we also learned that our county commissioners were willing to pledge their unwavering support for DHS and ICE, in spite of the horrific record of ICE abuses and murders. They continue to tell us they know nothing about the project, and if they did, there was nothing they could do about it. But the most important lesson that we continue to learn every day is that we are not alone. Washington County, if you're not familiar with it, if you drive west on I-70 and keep driving west until you intersect with I-81, when you hit that intersection, you're going to be right in the middle of Washington County, and at that point, you're only going to be a couple miles away from this warehouse that they want to turn into a detention camp. And as I said, we're a hardcore Republican county. There are 45,000 registered Republicans, 30,000 registered Democrats, 26,000 unaffiliated voters. We haven't had a Democrat on our Board of Commissioners for 20 years. People have kind of given up any hope of change. Anyone who wasn't a Trump supporter kept to themselves for fear of offending their neighbor or having their kids picked on at school or having their business suffer. But that is now changing. Our rallies over the past year have shown folks that they aren't alone, and our crowds have grown. People saw that there are others who share their feelings, and now they're willing to come out and share their feelings as well. Now the ICE warehouse and the abuses of ICE have inspired even more people to stand up and speak out. There are now several groups within the county working together to fight the warehouse and to support our immigrant neighbors. People in our small towns are realizing that they're not alone. And on March 28th, on No King's Day, many of them got together and had their own little mini No Kings rallies in their towns. They found their like-minded neighbors, and now they're getting together too. In Washington County, where you can easily drive a few minutes and cross the state line, we appreciate the support we've received from our nearby neighbors in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. We greatly appreciate the work of everyone in Maryland who's in this fight, the many organizations and coalitions, along with the work of our representatives in Washington, D.C., and our representatives in Annapolis, and especially the work being done by our Attorney General's office. The lesson we've learned in Washington County, I think, will change the face of our county for years to come. We've learned that we're not alone, we're not in this alone, and together we can make change happen.
The harvest of lessons. Thank you so much, Dave, for that extraordinary hard work, and we know you will be there day after day, month after month. Thank you so much. Indeed, Hagerstown lies to the west of us. In fact, my daughter lives out there, right about 2 miles from where the detention center is going to be built. And I know the terrain when I go out there and I see Confederate flags and a lot of Trump flags hanging out there. It's rough. They have done a phenomenal job moving this a progressive agenda forward. Indeed, if it lies west, then Hyattsville, just across the county border, lies to our east. And it's Hyattsville where ICE and CBP has decided to create an operational headquarters that will influence what happens in this city of ours and in the neighboring environs. I met Laura Usher a year ago at a statewide indivisible conference, and slowly that partnership has matured into a real collaboration because we are trying to build a series of solidarity relationships, east to west, and we have invitation from Gaithersburg and other areas to bring folks together to learn how to do the work that we're just hearing about. So it is with great pleasure that I invite Laura Usher to talk to us about the work that they have been carrying out in Hyattsville.
Got to bring that down about a foot. Good afternoon. My name is Laura Usher. I'm a Hyattsville resident, and I'm a co-leader of Indivisible Route 1 Corridor. And I just want to say thank you all for being here and for sticking it out to the end of a long but very interesting event. And I also want to thank our hosts with Takoma Park Mobilization. This has been very interesting for me to hear what's happening in the county over from us, because we have our own interests and facets and dramas in our county, in Prince George's County, as I'm sure you can imagine. So Indivisible Route 1 Corridor is a pro-democracy advocacy organization we started in February of 2025. We have about 500 members that represent community members in Hyattsville, College Park, University Park, Riverdale, Mount Rainier, all those towns along Route 1 from the border up to Beltsville. So we're not just in Hyattsville, but we have a very strong focus, a lot of members in Hyattsville. And we first, so to back up, Hyattsville has an existing immigration court and existing lawyers' offices in a building adjacent to the court. So we first learned last fall that there was an effort to expand that operational capacity, as David said, in somewhere in our region. And then in February, we learned that ICE is planning to lease space in the building where there are already OPLA lawyers' offices for ICE, and adjacent to the immigration court. And that happens to be in the middle of a busy commercial area with a lot of apartment buildings and condos. And the building actually shares space with the community college and with a county social services office. So it's a very busy area. And it has been very difficult to get information about the use of that space. Some of the local officials have said, well, it's just gonna be more lawyers. And, you know, first of all, that's obviously not a small thing. We don't want more and more lawyers able to deport people. But also, with the amount of space that they're asking for, we don't know whether something like what is happening in Baltimore might happen, where people are being held in rooms that are not intended to be detention, but being detained there. So what we do know right now is that the space has failed inspection 3 times. So we're very hopeful that that means, that they won't pass, but we don't know. And I want to say, prior to learning about this ICE expansion coming to our neighborhood, many, many local organizations have been working to resist ICE because there has been ongoing ICE activity in our part of Prince George's. Jess spoke so eloquently about the Immigrant Rights Coalition, and the MoCo IRC has nurtured Prince George's IRC. So they have been doing ICE Watch, rapid response in local communities, building community awareness about the existence of ICE and sort of the rights of individuals and businesses, and then also providing this mutual aid and support to immigrant families. And in Hyattsville, specifically, that mutual aid effort has really expanded to be its own entity. We have a weekly food drive, and we help to collect and then distribute with the IRC food to about 90 impacted families. And we have a lot of really engaged volunteers who are part of that operation. We're also really lucky to have the support of churches that provide direct support to some of these families and provide services like standby guardianship. And then we've had folks who are really active trying to keep the awareness of, that there is an immigration court, that there's serious things happening there through St. Camilla's Church and some of the others. Our Indivisible group has been engaged with our county council, and I think similar to what's happening in Montgomery County Council, our county council has passed a whole slate of bills that basically, try to make our county less friendly to ICE, and to say that Prince George's also doesn't consent to ICE operations. And we've supported the statewide coalition that is led by CASA, pushing some of the bills that a representative from CASA spoke about earlier. So just very briefly, since February, one of the things that we have done is, as an Indivisible chapter, in coalition with our IRC partners, with churches, with the DSA, with new sort of burgeoning activists, we have tried to bring all those partners together to get on the same page and build a strategy, because we're all doing great work, but we want to make sure that we're moving in concert. And we've hosted some mass meetings, well, one mass meeting similar to this, and planning another one. And what we've been trying to do is to move people into the existing avenues for resisting, for supporting, for advocating, and then also move people into hyper-local signal chats so that they can talk to their neighbors. And we're planning bystander training that will be at a larger scale for people who maybe aren't going to do ICE patrol, but are, able to report activities or record activities if they come into their awareness. We've also hosted non-cooperation training, which I think is really important to think about sort of the mindset of, where we're going now. We are not going to cooperate with this regime and to, support the activities that they want us to do. So we're very much in the thick of it, and I don't know that we have a conclusion to draw, but if you're in Prince George's County, I want to hear from you, and I've learned so much today talking and listening to the wonderful presenters from Montgomery County. So thank you very much.
So let's give a hand of thanks to all the presenters today. They've been just absolutely phenomenal. We have just a few more minutes, and I would like, Karen, if you could again see if there are any questions. People with questions and concerns should be standing again here at the aisle. And so let's see. We have people already in line before she even gets there. Carry on, Karen.
Name and a question. Okay. Hi, Risa Shaw from Takoma Park, Maryland. And I want to follow up on Jamie Coppell's question from the earlier panel. We hold up Minneapolis around here a lot. And we do that while at the same time the frequency and the consistency of the violence and the cruelty and the quiet pain is happening here every day and has been for months. And my neighbors and friends and family don't always realize that. And so my question to you, and my immediate neighborhood got activated on August 18th when 2 gentlemen were abducted a block from my house. And I don't want everybody in this room to wait for somebody to be abducted in front of their house to get activated, or the friends that we know, because maybe you are activated already. But what I'd like to know from each of you is, what is 1 or 2 actions that you would like us to see? And in large part, I am saying us white people, because that's who I am. White people who may or may not have money, may or may not think we have the time, may or may not think we have anything that would make a difference. Every single person in this town can make so much more of a difference. So what do you want us to do?
Thank you for that question. And thank you for bringing attention to the fact that there is so much attention that goes to organizing in other states and other cities when there's organizing happening right here in our neighborhood, in our community, that we can plug into today. So as I mentioned, we provide community-centered, impacted person-led trainings. Take trainings, learn how you can respond and support in a situation where ICE may come into your community or come in sight and you want to know what to do and how to support. We can provide you with that knowledge and those tools on how to do that. We also have an extensive community care team that, as Laura mentioned, we partner with several collectives and volunteers like Route 1 Indivisible to provide groceries, basic needs like diapers, and other things to over 200 families across Montgomery County and Prince George's County, because we don't believe in borders. We also, so we need folks that can drive. We need folks that can donate diapers or organize diaper drives. We need folks that can help organize those donations. As Laura mentioned, there are many volunteers that help to do that. We need folks every single week that can do that. We also need financial support. We support families in creating GoFundMes that are community fueled. We share their GoFundMes with community, and we let them know, we're leaning into our networks, our community, for them to come through, and we need you to come through. So we share those GoFundMes. We have fundraisers, tabling events where we sell shirts and stickers and totes and things like that, and all the money from those proceeds goes to our families that have had a loved one detained by ICE. Most of the time, almost all of the time, it has been their primary or sole income provider. As Luisa mentioned, we have cases of what we call young guardians, who are 19, 20, 21-year-olds who are now caring for their younger siblings because both parents have been detained. So these funds to the GoFundMes go directly to those families' bank accounts. Every purchase you make of our stickers or anything like that also goes to them. So those are just some ways that you can get connected and support today. Thank you.
A minister just left to return to his church. They lost a fifth of their congregation, either by deportations or self-deportations or relocations. We're looking at a moment that's very dangerous for our community. Two things that we're doing locally. We're having a a bond support network being built with Amica. So tomorrow at 10 a.m. we have a meeting in DC. If you're interested, you can see our table and get more information if you'd like to join and help your faith community, or if you have a community org that would like to help bond people out. We use some of our faith connections. For example, we have a lot of people who are detained and shipped off. So we help people return from El Paso, Louisiana. We've also used our faith connections to connect with people who have been deported to foreign countries. For example, transporting them from their airport to wherever they need to go and home. For example, we helped a family in Central Asia return home. April 28th is Kilmar's next event. So we have a public witness event in collaboration with CASA. We're actually going to organize a fasting and prayer leading up to that. We also do advocacy. For example, in our newsletter this morning, we sent out a letter to support the TPS recipients. There's some good movement happening in the House. We're trying to encourage the Senate. And also, this week we have ecumenical advocacy days, where we're trying to, at the federal level, promote safe spaces. So check out our newsletter. At our table, too, you can get more information on how to get involved in what we do as well.
I'd like to save the last question for our Honorable Mayor, Talisha Searcy. Please, it's an honor to have you here, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I just want to thank you all for being here today. The first panel was amazing, and this one is amazing as well. I appreciate all of the work that you're doing in your partnership. I know that we've been able to call on MoCo IRC, and Luisa, your office is on speed dial, so we are so appreciative of all of the work. It is taking a collaborative effort to address what is happening right now, which is really unprecedented. But I do want to just take a couple of quick seconds to talk a little bit about what the city of Takoma Park is doing to address the issue as well, and how you could help us. So one of the big things that we've been hosting is a number of Know Your Rights trainings. We've been doing that for some time. We have also been staunch advocates for a number of the state laws that were recently passed in terms of the elimination of the 287G, also the masking bills. We've been definitely advocating, and now that many of those have passed, the big thing for us and what happens with the county in terms of the county laws is how we may be able to bring those things and whether or not there are any modifications that we need to make within the city of Takoma Park to make any adaptations or adjustments to adopt similar regulations here. Another big thing that we have been doing is providing funds to organizations like We Are CASA. So far, with a small grant that we've provided, we've already heard that about 18 households, about 49 individuals have been benefited because of the resources that we've made available. And so I want to just put in a shameless plug because the deadline is looming. The Community Quality of Life grant is now open. It closes, applications are accepted through Wednesday, April the 22nd, and it includes areas that are covered include youth enrichment, food insecurity reduction, workforce development, and immigrant support services, specifically benefiting families affected by federal immigration actions. So I am encouraging people to apply. Our FY27 budget allocates right now proposed $250,000, and the awards can range from $5,000 to $20,000, with most awards expected to be between $8,000 and $10,000 for the 12-month funding cycle. So we have a number of nonprofit organizations and groups that are here today, and I just want to encourage you all to apply to those city funds so that we can make sure that we're providing the necessary support for so many in our community that are being impacted.
We are preparing. We are prepared. And it's by coming together through the diversity and the recognition that every contribution is fundamental to maintaining the fabric of this wall of resistance to protect our most vulnerable and our democracy. I want to thank all of you for coming here, for expressing your solidarity, and I have passed the final word to our treasurer. I think I know what this is about, but let it flow.
I don't. I want to thank the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They have stepped up. They give us this access to this church. They give IRC and the Community Support Network access to the community building where they have meetings. It's an amazing partnership. We were like wondering how we were going to fit everybody into where we were going to do. We talked to Steve, Pastor Steve, I mean, just amazing. and, you know, he gave us the church. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's that community work that happens between churches, people, organizations. Get involved, folks. Get involved. Even if you just drive food to someplace, even if you just can cook something, whatever it is. There's a great thing that Community Support Network has, which is this little, I've done volunteer work forever, and it's this like, this cardboard thing full of little things that say, do you like to lurk? And you look under there, and it tells you what you can do. Do you like to, what's another? Do you like to ride your bike? And you lift it up, and it tells you what you can do. It's a great organizing tool. Yeah, we go to local schools to stand guard. We go, what are they called, moats? So we send ice out around where we know that there's a vulnerable group of people, to churches, to food distribution. An hour a week, you know, you can go and you can just learn how to look out for ice. We have saved people from being picked up by ice just by being there. So please find a way to get involved and find a way to get every single person in your neighborhood involved. This is a long fight, folks. This is one that we're fighting for the democracy of our children and our grandchildren. And it starts here, now in Takoma Park. Thank you.